So now the Jewish festivals around Europe have already quite a long history of around 30 years of being there in Europe. And I have a few maps that I wanted to start with that are picturing the development, spatial development, geographical development of Jewish festivals around Europe and how they were growing over the last 30 years. But I'm just going to concentrate on Poland, and it might not be complete and it's a little bit dated, so I apologize for that. I have a more updated version coming. I am going to concentrate on Poland today because I feel like Poland is a very important place and has a central role because Jewish festivals and the so-called Jewish revival, something that goes along two lines of, on the one hand, community revival, on the other hand, this more commercialized or cultural revival that not necessarily has to do with Jews or is not necessarily performed by Jews, has a central role in a few wider debates on national identity, on commemoration, memory, and also on how we narrate the past in Poland, our national past in Poland. And I have been looking at the Jewish festivals for quite a while as one of the settings, as one of the spaces in which non-Jews very intimately engage with Jewish culture. And what was particularly interesting for me, where a certain negotiation of identity is taking place beyond the dichotomies of just Jewish and non-Jewish, and where this negotiation is probably going into the direction of what you were calling the community of heritage or heritage community. So I have taken for my talk a term from a well-known term coming from Mary-Louise Pratt of contact zones, which are social spaces where cultures meet, clash, and grapple with each other, often in context of highly asymmetrical relations of power, such as colonialism, slavery, or their aftermaths. So Pratt was working with the colonial, post-colonial context, but what I found particularly interesting in this idea is this double nature of these spaces of encounter, that are spaces of encounter both in the meaning of meeting the other, but also in the meaning of clashing with the other, in the meaning of being places of conflict, not only of dialogue. And also places of what she calls creative appropriation, that I argue is also happening in the context of Jewish festivals in Europe, in places like Poland, where also these where we also have to do with this highly asymmetrical power relations of a majority culture and a minority culture, which is very important. And Jewish festivals are also places in which a majority is consuming a culture, heritage of a minority, and in the process of this consumption or creative appropriation, as Pratt has it, there's a generation of a new identity that is kind of beyond any of these two, so beyond the culture of origin, but it's also not exactly the culture of the appropriators, if I can call it this way. And one of the ideas, theoretical ideas that I have been working with is also the concept of cultural anthropophagy. That sounds pretty terrible because it basically means cultural cannibalism, that comes from Brazil and comes from Oswald de Andrade, who had this idea of a creative process in which one ethnic group eats, consumes the other, and it's a very creative and also selective process in which certain things are being digested and taken, and certain other things are being rejected, and an end product of this digestion or consumption is something entirely new. So nothing like the elements that have been taken in a way. A little bit macabre, perhaps, but I also find it pretty inspiring, actually, for what is taking place in Eastern Central Europe right now. So we have this idea of meeting the other, of a conflict, of creative appropriation, and of critical truth-telling. And this is something that I'm going to come back in a moment. I have a book on this subject, basically. But I'm not going to talk much about what is in the book, because in the book I concentrate very much on these processes of negotiation and these processes of identity formation that I think are a little bit less interesting for us today. Today I would like to speak about the context that enables this negotiation. So the context, in other words, that enables cultural cannibalism in terms of Oswald de Andrade. And I want to concentrate on three functions of the Jewish festivals as contact zones, on the question of conflict, on the question of truth-telling, and on the question of meeting the other. And just to begin, this is a map of Poland which is pretty up-to-date, but maybe I'm also missing something, with Jewish festivals all over the place, and also a few Jewish museums. And what is interesting about it is that we have Jewish festivals appearing not only in larger urban centers, but also in quite a lot of smaller towns, and it's quite distributed around Poland. And what I find particularly interesting is that we now have a number of Jewish culture festivals taking place in the eastern and northern areas that used to be German before the Second World War, and this is the topic that came up in the discussion about Breslau, Wrocław. This Jewish heritage is kind of doubly alienated, or doubly alienating for Poles, because it is not only Jewish heritage, but it's also German Jewish heritage. So it's interesting that this embrace of Jewish heritage includes also a gesture of embracing German heritage in this case. Although Jewish festivals, I think a little bit, I'm sorry. Right, that makes sense now. I was on the wrong page. The festival in Kraków, just a few words on Kraków, has had in this year its 27th edition, and expanded over the years into a very versatile format with concerts, also with lectures, with exhibitions, guided tours, walking tours, workshops of different kind for adults and for children, and has grown into a massive event that has also, I would say, like a number of other Polish festivals of Jewish culture, has profited very much from the digital turn, so is now able to reach a much larger amount of people. So the Jewish festival in Krakow has around 200 events in around 10 days. And the events themselves are reaching, or the festival is able to attract around 30,000 visitors. But the broadcast, there's a live or not always live broadcast of the final concert of the festival, reaches 10 times as much. But the YouTube channels that they activate reach over 1.5 million spectators. So you can see that the reach and the impact of these festivals are constantly growing, and we can also see how dynamic and how expanding and versatile this phenomenon is. So coming back to the qualities of the contact zone, and let's say the theoretical framework that I would like to place this discussion in, the Jewish festivals provide a space that is intimate and small scale, that actually allow encounter and face-to-face encounters of people. They provide a space that is performative, and also a place that, a context that triggers a lot of emotion, also because they use historic spaces, spaces that are marked by Jewish life, also by Jewish death. And also because they provide spaces in which we have cultural brokers as facilitators of dialogue. So in a way, the people encountering each other in this space are not left alone. And the final quality is this something that I called an open wound quality of memory. The fact that a lot of traumas that relate to the presence of Jewish culture and Jewish heritage in Poland are still very fresh, and a lot of stereotypes are very present and very much alive. So it's also a very difficult space. And although Jewish festivals in Poland, but also elsewhere, are very often marketed as sites of dialogue and sites of understanding, they are also very often really sites of conflict. And to give you just an obvious example, obviously they trigger anti-Semitic responses sometimes, and we had also cases like that in Poland where we had pickets of neo-Nazi organizations, for example, here in front of the Kupa synagogue in Krakow during a lecture of Shevach Weiss. It was 2008, so it was the anniversary of the State of Israel. This edition of the festival was also devoted to this anniversary, and it triggered this kind of counter-reaction, but then it triggered also a counter-reaction. So participants of the festival, staff and visitors formed something like a human chain in front of these neo-Nazi protesters, kind of blocking them from view and showing solidarity with the event, which was a very interesting incident. But apart from such extreme cases, and these are extreme cases, the festivals provide a forum for important but also very difficult and painful debates. Debates about gentrification of Jewish quarters, debates about restitution of Jewish property, also debates about philosemitism and the politicization of Jewish festivals. So the question of whether Jewish festivals in places like Poland are not just fig leaves covering up the situation that is not necessarily always that positive. I mean, in a country that still has xenophobic attitudes, and according to sociological polls, xenophobic attitudes are actually on the rise in Poland and not declining. And this year was particularly interesting because the Jewish festival in Krakow took place amidst a political conflict, so amidst a wave of protest against our current government, right-wing government, basically trying to dismantle liberal democracy. So the festival was kind of in the middle of all of these events. The public TV station, which has been taken over by our government, basically is being controlled by one right-wing party, still broadcasted the festival, still featured the festival, but it was interesting how they did it. And if you just have a look at the website of this TV station, the event is being advertised with this one photo, one video of one event of the festival that took place inside a Catholic church. It was a photo exhibition about Jerusalem, and it was at the Dominican church. And this feature, also for some reason, the title reads that the festival begins on Sunday, which in fact it didn't, because it always begins on Saturday evening. So somehow the whole framing is already very weird. And there's an interview with Janusz Makuch, the director of the festival, beneath this film, and they feature a quote from him. I'm sure it's completely taken out of context, that reads, "No matter who is at power and which political party rules, our philosophy is one of mutual respect," suggesting as if that the Jewish festival and Janusz Makuch is somehow embracing or endorsing the current government, which is very problematic. Apart from being a place of outward conflict, the festivals are also places of what I call critical truth-telling, so places in which critical scholarship relating to Polish Jewish history, especially history of Polish anti-Semitism, is being presented. Such important books as Neighbors by Jan Tomasz Gross or Hunt for the Jews by Jan Grabowski have all been presented at Jewish festivals in Poland, and it is important because these two figures are really being vilified in Poland right now. So, for example, our current president is considering stripping Jan Tomasz Gross of a high state distinction, and Jan Grabowski, the author of Hunt for the Jews, faced this year a smear campaign by an organization called Polish League Against Defamation, for apparently slandering the Polish nation. And both of these episodes illustrate the current shift in Polish politics that is following the motto of the rejection of the so-called pedagogy of shame. So pedagogy of shame was all of this critical scholarship that was engaging with difficult chapters in Polish Jewish history, such as anti-Semitism, for example, and instead of that, we have now a new policy of national pride. So public spaces that allow presentation of critical scholarship like that are really not to be underestimated right now in Poland. And the festivals are not only for critical scholarship, but also for critical museology, and I just wanted to show this one example of an exhibition on these infamous figurines of Jews holding a coin that have conquered the Polish souvenir market over the last years. It's an exhibition that took place in 2013, made by the curator and scholar Erika Lehrer. The exhibition was entitled Lucky Jews, is entirely available online, and it was also based on a crowdsourcing campaign. So the curator first asked Poles to upload pictures of the figurine of Jews that they might own or they might keep at home, photograph them and send them to this website, and then at the end there was also a possibility of giving feedback or giving personal opinions about this phenomenon or the figurines, of how people feel about them. And visitors of the exhibition were also able to meet the actual carvers, so the artists who make them. So it was this very interesting place of encounter. The Jewish festival in Krakow has also a format that is actually dedicated just to that. It's called open meetings, where Jews and non-Jews get together and just talk, basically, in a small group. The festivals have also a number of formats that are, I would say, semi-religious or have a religious aspect. In Krakow, we have a Malawe Malke ceremony on the first evening of the festival. There's a klezmerska Havdala in Wrocław, or there's also a Shabbos dinner in Warsaw, in Plac Grzybowski. And these events have a powerful effect not only on non-Jews who have an opportunity to learn about Jewish rituals, Jewish traditions, but also on Polish Jews. And I would like to just bring two quotes. First of all, from Boaz Pash, who was the rabbi in Krakow in 2008, and he said in an interview that the festival gives the local Jewish community, I quote, recognition as an important other culture. It's important for them that people know, hey, you exist, and we know you exist. It's important on the level of self-esteem. At least for 10 days, you can be in Kazimierz and you can be proud. We are here and we are important. There is also a quote from another Polish Jew visiting the festival in Krakow and visiting one of these religious or semi-religious events in temple synagogue, and he said something that I find very moving. In some Polish synagogues, you meet only old people now. That's why when I come to a synagogue that is filled with people, even if only 2% of them are Jewish and 98% are non-Jewish, I feel very moved. When people leave the synagogue after prayer, and you can hear this hubbub of voices, you feel the pre-war atmosphere of the town. We do not always have a minyan during the services, and here at the festival, seeing so many Jews and a full synagogue, so many people, feel real joy. Sometimes I just like standing in front of the synagogue and looking at the people talking to each other. In my town, the synagogue has been closed for many years. So you can see that, that the festivals have a function of creating this extraordinary space, these extraordinary conditions for people to meet, voice their position, stand in for the other, also express critique, learn, have a moment of nostalgia or maybe even a moment of utopia. Having said all this, the festivals have faced a lot of criticism, and also justifiably so. Many of these productions are not free from cliches or stereotypes. And in the current scholarship, there has been a debate about how they could be labeled, and Michael Meng spoke in this context, for example, of redemptive cosmopolitanism, so something that outwardly exhibits tolerance but without any critical engagement with the problematic parts. And there has also been quite a new book entitled Philosemitic Violence, which also relates to these festivals as one of the vehicles of this so-called philosemitic violence. And the authors, Elżbieta Janicka and Tomasz Żukowski, formulate a claim that passionately positive feelings is their terms, of the majority, addressed at the imagined collective object identified as Jews, are nothing else than a form of violence. And that this collective fixation on Jews in Poland only reproduces anti-Semitic prejudices and serves the ulterior motive of securing a positive image, but for the self. So in this case, Poles are showcasing their own positive feelings towards Jews and evading any deeper reflection on the difficult aspects, also orientalizing Jews and replacing Jews by a cultural product. So the Jews are not in the picture themselves, but just the product. I just have to say, just at the end of my talk, that I think I was able to demonstrate how untrue this conclusion is, that spaces such as the Jewish Festival do not provide this critical space, because they do, and they do also provide a space for Jews themselves. They do not replace Jews, and I think that in a place like Poland, where Jews constitute such a minuscule percentage of the population, such events, whether we like them or whether we don't like them, offer Poles a chance to shorten this distance between them and the other, the Jew, and to become emotionally engaged. So I believe that the cultural experience opens a space of contact, enables critique, but also cooperation, as we have seen in the other presentations in a wonderful way. And this potential, even if its reach may eventually be limited to a small number of people, now thanks to YouTube to a little bit of a bigger number of people, should not be underestimated, particularly in contemporary Poland, where, as I said, xenophobic attitudes are on the rise, anti-Semitism is on the rise, and ethno-nationalist narratives have actually kind of hijacked the mainstream culture. And I'll just end on that. Thank you.